Okay, so in this lesson we will talk about three separate panels in one. Okay, sharpening, lens corrections, and effects. So to just get going, uh, the detail panel is synonymous with sharpening. This is where you add the sharpening into your image. Okay, now again, this class is just the basics of Lightroom. We're not going to go into super crazy detail. Because pretty much I want to give you what I feel are just the basic things that you need to know so you don't get bogged down in things that aren't really that important. And sharpening, it's very important to properly sharpen your images, but sharpening can also get kind of complicated, and I don't think it really needs to. So that's why I'm just going to explain a very simple way that I think you should sharpen your images, and I think you can go from there. And then once you get more advanced in Lightroom, you can look into more details about sharpening and then decide if you want to change more of the advanced settings in sharpening. Okay, so to get us started off, let's just talk about what sharpening is. So essentially what sharpening does is it adds contrast around the edges in your image. And when it does that, it gives the illusion that your photo is more sharp. Okay? Now, whenever you're shooting a raw photo, you need to add sharpening every time. Because when you take a raw photo, your camera just kind of spits it out and it doesn't add anything to the photo. When you're shooting in something like JPEG, the camera adds contrast, saturation, and a little bit of sharpening and it spits it out. A raw file doesn't do that. It comes out essentially naked with no settings. So you need to add a little bit of sharpening to all of your photos. But thankfully in Lightroom, it's pretty easy to add sharpening. Okay, so let's go down the list of these sharpening sliders. Okay, amount. This is just the amount of sharpening that's applied globally to your image. The default is 23. And as you can see, you can go all the way up to 150, but you don't want to really do that because you don't want to over sharpen your image. If you over sharpen your image, it might look okay on your screen, but when you post it to Facebook or something like that, it's going to look really awful because Facebook will compress your image, and when it's viewed with that over sharpening, it's going to look really crunchy and hideous. So you don't really want to go overboard with your sharpening, okay? But at the same time, you want to add enough sharpening where it'll help make your images look more sharp, and just more tack sharp, okay? So add a decent amount of sharpening, but don't go too far, okay? I typically add about at least 50 of sharpening, but it also depends too. If I'm working with a very dark image, like if I'm doing night photography, I don't want to add a lot of sharpening because when you add sharpening, you're also going to be adding noise into your image. And when you're working with a dark image, it's easier to add. You'll add a lot more noise the more sharpening that you add. Okay, therefore, in an image like this, I could add a lot more sharpening than if this image was taken at night, because there's not as much, no, there's just no darkness in this image, so I can go further with the sharpening without having to worry about adding unwanted noise. Okay, the radius, what this is it's determining how many pixels of sharpening you're going to be adding around the edge. So the default setting is 1, but it can go as high up to 3. So that means at 3, as opposed to 1, 1 is sharpening 1 pixel outside of the edge, right? But 3 is sharpening 3 pixels outside of the edge. So I guess you're getting uh, sharpening over a wider area around your edges. I've never really played around with it at all. To be honest, I keep it at 1 and I leave it at that. Because for me, I like that photography is very technical, but I don't like it to be
too technical. I like to focus more on the art of what I'm doing and not worry about all the technicalities. So things like this, I just leave them to their standard settings and I move on. Okay, detail is how much detail like how much sharpening you'll add to the tiny little details in your image. So for example, like this is a nice sharp image right out of the camera. We have a lot of really neat details in these rocks. I suppose if you were to add more detail, then these you would just have more sharpening applied to these tiny little crevices. But you know what? Detail is another thing that I just don't worry about. I just keep it set to 25 and I leave it at that. Just to me, it doesn't seem that important to be messing with the detail. Okay, masking. This is the most important function in the slider. Okay, what masking does is it tells you what areas you want to sharpen in your image. Okay, and I'm just going to show you this. Okay, so if you hold down the Option key and you hold down on the masking slider, your image turns white. If you start sliding it, what you see is the black around the white is essentially where you are masking out the sharpening. Another way to put it is the black is where you're not applying sharpening. The white is where you're applying sharpening. Okay? Now, why would you even want to mask your sharpening? Why wouldn't you just want to add sharpening globally or through the whole image? Well, the reason why is because sharpening adds noise. All right? And if you're adding a little bit of noise, but you're increasing the sharpness of the details in your photo, then it's all well and good. But why would you want to add noise to detailless skies up here? Okay, there's no detail in the sky. So there's no reason to add any sharpening because all you're going to do is add noise into the sky. Now, again, this is a daytime photo, so you're not going to see as much noise. But if this was taken later on in the day where it was a little darker, you're going to see a lot more noise. Okay, so you don't really need to apply any kind of sharpening in the sky. Maybe, sure, around these clouds, yeah, apply the sharpening, and definitely where you want the sharpening to go is around here. This is where your eye's going. But you don't need sharpening in these areas of the sky, and you definitely don't want sharpening in these dark areas because, again, those dark areas, that's where the noise is going to come out. So definitely mask out the sharpening here. So let's do this again, okay? All right, let's hold down the Option key and let's slide down to where we're getting sharpening in the areas that we want it. Right? Now look at this. This is a little better. Maybe we can pull back to add a little bit more sharpening. But you see, this is better. We're sharpening in those little details in the sky, in the clouds, but we're not sharpening the sky. We're sharpening the peaks there, but we're not sharpening the area below these peaks. We don't really need sharpening here. And although we're still sharpening in the trees, we've reduced the amount of sharpening that we're doing in those shadows. Okay, so that's what masking is. You're going to want to mask every single time you sharpen. Okay, I didn't even know what masking was when I started using Lightroom, so I had to go back and remask all of my photos, but it's not really that big of a deal. It's just something you should get in the habit of doing. Okay, now let's go back to the amount. Now, we're going to actually apply the sharpening now that we've masked out the areas we don't want to sharpen. Okay, to do that, we want to zoom into 100% so we can really get a good look at what we're doing. All right, let's take out the sharpening altogether. Now, I'm sure you can't really see it too well on your screen, but here we can see with no sharpening, obviously we're kind of blurring out a lot of those details. With maximum sharpening, it actually doesn't look too terrible on my computer, but we just know out of the gate that this is going to be too much. This is going to be too strong. So let's maybe start at 50 and see how it works there. we've sharpened our image pretty well here, but oh, I'm at 30. Okay, we sharpened it pretty well, but I wouldn't mind just adding a little bit more. I'm probably just going to go up to about 70 in sharpening. Okay, and now we will hit the before and the after key to see what we've done. And I see that we've brought out a lot of detail in this mountain here. Okay, now, couple more things. You can zoom in on your image manually like this, or you can actually click here in this little box. And sometimes I kind of prefer doing it this way because you can really get a good look at what you're doing. Okay? Another way to do it is you can click on this little tool here and slide it over your image, and you'll actually see, where you have that little crosshair pointed. If you click it, it will leave the your little preview box there. Okay, so that's a handy little tool to use. Like if you want to just hover over this peak, you can do that, and now you can apply your sharpening as much as you want. Okay, I typically just like to zoom in on my own like this and look at it. I get a better view of what's going on as opposed to this little box down here. Okay. Noise reduction. Okay, so this is reducing noise in your image. Okay, uh, now when you add luminance into your photo, essentially what you're doing is you're actually blurring your photo a little bit. So you're actually kind of smudging out all of those fine details. So anytime you anytime you apply sharpening, essentially most of the time you're adding noise. But anytime you apply luminance, yeah, you're getting rid of the noise, but you're also reducing your sharpening. So you have to balance those two things together. If there's a ton of noise in your photo, then you will definitely want to add some luminance, but you want to be a little more careful in how you do it. Okay? In this case, we don't really need to add any luminance because there's not much noise in here at all. But let me just show you what this photo looks like if you add 100% luminance. Yeah, you see all of our details are just kind of smudged right out of that image. Okay, let's reset it, and everything came back. Okay, luminance is something you're going to use more when you're doing night photography. And, correct me if I'm wrong, but let me see here. A better thing to do if you're working with night photos is you can actually use an adjustment brush and you can just paint in the sharpening where you need it, which is kind of a cool way to do sharpening. But I don't often need to do that. Typically, for my photos, what I do is I just apply sharpening through the panel. Okay, so that's a pretty basic understanding of sharpening. Lens correction. So what a lens correction does is you can add, you can take out, let me just show you what a lens correction is. Okay, so here from our basic panel, okay, enable profile corrections. Essentially what this is doing is, let's say you're using a fisheye lens, or if you're using a lens that like a very wide angle lens where there's a distortion, what this is going to do is it's going to fix your photo. It's going to fix that distortion in your photo. Let me see if I can find one that's a better example. Okay, here we go. This should give us a better example, okay? No, it's not. Okay, let me try another one. Let's see, maybe here. Yeah, there we go. Okay. I was afraid it was going to make a fool of me again. So yeah, I took this image with a wide angle. We can tap the I key to look at our settings. This is a 24 millimeter, and at the landscape setting, there's a little bit of distortion. So if I click the enable profile corrections, is it not going to do it now? Let's see. Oh yeah, there we go. You can see it fixes that. Okay. However, I don't really add this into my photo unless it bothers me. Unless that distortion actually bothers me, I don't even bother setting the enable profile corrections because as long as I'm happy with how it looks, I'm going to leave it, okay? In this case, I kind of like how it looks when I enable this profile correction, okay? Remove chromatic aberrations. Let's see if we can see any up here, okay? So what a chromatic aberration is, you know what, I can't even fully explain technically what it is, but a chromatic aberration is when you get these weird little um, lines around your image, and mainly you're going to see them when you're using a lower quality lens. But you might see like these purple little lines along your image. And I'm sorry that I don't have an example set up here, but essentially, if you ever needed to correct that, all you need to do is click on the remove chromatic aberrations, and it's going to go ahead and do that for you. Okay. Let's go back to. Okay. Okay. Down here we have this is our level. So if the image was off-centered, you can hit automatic, and it's going to level your photo. To be honest, I never use this because I prefer to level my images in the crop area, and I'm going to show you how we do that later. So I never really use this, but if you wanted to level your image, you can hit level by vertical or just auto, and it's going to analyze the image and level it. But it doesn't always do a great job, so I don't really bother using it. Okay. Profile correction. Essentially what this is if you're using a lens that causes distortion all the time, you can come in here and you can actually, I think you can download these lens corrections where, for example, if you're using a fisheye lens, you can get the excuse me here, the lens profile, and it'll give you the settings that will remove that fisheye from your photo and make it look better. And you can have it in as a profile correction so that it'll apply to the image automatically, which is pretty cool. Uh, Color diffringe, this is once again something that you would use to remove chromatic aberrations. I don't really use it, it's more of an advanced mode. And then this again, this is if you were trying to adjust distortion out of your image. You could do it this way if you really don't like the way Lightroom does it, okay? Again, I never really use this. I've never really found a need that I needed to do this, okay? Okay, effects. Essentially what this is you can add a vignette to your image, which can often be pretty interesting. Vignette is when you add, you know, the darkness around those corners to kind of draw the eye in a little more. A lot of times, I like a vignette because it helps to pull your eye into where you want it to go. This image is a great example of where a vignette could be really helpful because we don't really have nothing going on in the corners of the frames. So why not direct the viewer into the center of the frame where the magic's actually happening? Okay, so to add a vignette, you want to use negative numbers to add the actual dark vignette. If you have a vignette in your image that was caused by your lens and you want to remove it, then you would add positive numbers. What that does is it adds like a negative vignette with white, so that will kind of counterbalance an unwanted vignette. Okay, but if you want to use a vignette for an artistic purpose, then you use negative numbers. So let's go ahead and add a +20 vignette. Okay, now the other settings on a vignette. Okay, midpoint, what that does is it kind of tells us like where do we want that vignette to taper off. You can see like when we go to 100, it keeps it right around the edge, but it doesn't look good. I mean, that looks like the lens caused it, and it's not really giving us an artistic feel to it. But if we wanted to pull in a little more, this is what we would do with the midpoint, okay? If we go all the way down to a 0 value, you see that it's essentially not a vignette at all. All it's doing is darkening our image. Well, no, I guess so. I guess the vignette is really coming to around this midpoint, okay? So you kind of set the vignette to where you want it to go. I'd say right about here looks a little bit better, okay? Roundness, what this does is it just kind of controls how the vignette tapers off. Let's keep that to a 0. Feather, now as you can see, that tells us like how much of a feather we're applying to the edge of this vignette. 0, we're just getting a hard stop vignette. Whereas all the way we're getting, it's very hard to distinguish where the vignette is. Okay? And that's pretty much all I adjust on the vignette. Okay? Alright, I'm going to kind of add the feather to there. Let's look at a before and an after. Before and after. See, I like that. It pulls your eye into the image. Okay? Grain, this is adding grain to your image. If you wanted to, I don't know, make your image look more old-timey, we could do that. We could maybe add more of like a black and white. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. That looks like almost something Ansel Adams might have taken. No, I mean, that sounds really arrogant. Not that I think I'm Ansel Adams or anything. Far from it. Okay, but we can add grain to our image. I've never really felt a need to do that. Dehaze. So this is a feature that's actually new to me. What dehaze does is, I think what it does is it adds more contrast into into the midtones in your image. And when it does that, it kind of removes haze from your image. So if you're shooting in the middle part of the day, the dehaze can be kind of a cool feature to use. I haven't used it too much, but I hear it's very helpful for night photography because it helps to deepen the blacks a lot more and reduce a lot of noise. To be honest, I haven't really been too super impressed with dehaze. I think to me it seems like essentially all it's doing is adding contrast. So I haven't found too much of a need for it. However, a lot of photographers are really in love with this feature. All right, so that's about it for this lesson. In the next lessons, we're going to start talking about these tools that we have up in this panel. All right, thanks a lot and have a good day.